Welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at Softears volume. So first, before we begin, I do want to thank Softears for giving me a very, very generous discount on this one. It is a set that I had sort of begged them to get a reviewer discount on because I really, really wanted it. I'm a huge Softears fan, so this one was kind of at the top of my list when it was supposed to come out late last year and didn't. It kind of got bumped to this year, so I'd been tracking it for a while and really wanted to get my hands on it, and fortunately they did offer me a great discount, so here it is. So it does come with packaging and tips, 3 sets of tips, silicone, these are the brand new clear ones, and these are the foam tips. Black cable is very nice, leather case is very nice. IEM itself, again, very nice in this very sort of unique green color. You don't see it all that often, but inside we can see the big dynamic driver right there, and there are 2 BAs kind of sitting there, 2 to the nozzle. So these happen to be the Softears foam tips, which I generally happen to prefer on these. The clear tips were a little too small for me. These tended to work out better for me, so I kind of stuck with the foam tips, but they do give you a very generous assortment of tips and cables and all of that. So we won't dwell too much on the packaging in the box too much, so we can kind of get into it. So maybe before we begin, as I said, I'm kind of a huge Softears fan. These are my personal RSVs, and I had a loaner pair, and I listened to them for I think one afternoon, and I sort of decided right then these were going to be mine at some point. And fortunately, someone had some up for sale used, and I picked them up. But it is a set. It's, you know, between EJ07M and RSV, it's kind of tough to pick the favorite child, but they really, really are some of my favorite sets. And I was really super excited when Softears had announced volume, and really wanted to get my hands on it. So this kind of is a bit personal for me. You know, usually just new sets come and go, and this one is one that I really, really pursued. And I had super high expectations because I have, you know, I love RSV, and these are expectation, bar setting, great set of earphones. And so I think expectations were sort of huge for what volume was going to be. And then when it was delivered, you know, it was just different than I had expected. Not so much that my expectations weren't met, but they were different. And we'll kind of get into it now. But yeah, this one is kind of tougher than a normal. You know, someone KZ sends you a set and it doesn't work out. Yeah, this one it's kind of tough, and it took me a while to kind of get to this point where I wanted to talk about the review and what I found here. So let's kind of start with, for the Softears fans, guys who have RSV, guys who, like me, were lucky enough to try Cerberus. It does have some Softears DNA buried deep in there, and there's very much a focus or an attention on driver coherence, 1 DD, 2 BAs. They work very well together. The tuning, you know, sort of resembles some of the DNA, but the 3K is kind of odd, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And dynamic driver, I think, is very much in line with what I had expectations for and how it sounds. I think they kind of nailed that part. So the stuff that was kind of questionable for Softears fans, this fun tuning, and that was what I had heard about volume, you know, before it was even announced. It was going to be a fun tuning, a fun set, something different from their, you know, a departure from their reference sets like RSV. So yeah, the fun tuning is a departure from what I love about RSV, RS5, and Cerberus. It's odd. I mean, we'll take a look at it in a minute, but not what I was expecting. It kind of lost those natural, nothing out of place parts, and a relaxing detail that you really find in RS5. So kind of odd, but it's fun, so we'll kind of keep our minds open to it. But the 3K peak and the medium volume levels were, again, kind of a departure from what you find in their other sets. I wasn't expecting a bright set, and I think that's what they delivered, especially with the 3K peak, and having to limit the volume level is kind of wasn't what I was expecting at all. So the variable out of the box experience. So they give you 3 boxes of tips, and other people I know who receive volume, I think everyone had these weird first impressions of it, and I think it was a little more variable than I was expecting, and I wasn't really sure, should it be deep fit, shallow fit, clear tips, foam tips, nothing really seemed to click. And as other people were trying it, I would try what they were doing, and nothing kind of clicked. So yeah, it was kind of odd. Whereas RSV is kind of, once you get the fit right, once you get tips that fit, it's pretty much flawless from there on. So yeah, kind of weird. So the sound. So kind of a slight bass boosted, upper mid focus, energetic, edgy, bright, and intense. So lots of adjectives there, but let's take a look at what's kind of going on here. So ignore the green line. So the red line is actually RS5. So it's got this slight bass boosted, flat, neutral mids, and then it's got this nice, probably a 10 dB rise, and this very polite treble that takes volume scaling very well, because there aren't really any peaks or bright spots to it at all. So what volume did was, give it a slightly more fun bass. So kind of everything from the sub bass through the mid bass, just a little thicker, a little more rumble there, and I think that worked out pretty well. Carry in a little more thickness to the mids. Again, that's kind of fun, that's okay. But then this early rise, and then, this is probably, 15 dB, 13, 15, I don't know what it is, but the actual rise here is just a bit too much for me, and it's really a bit too much for volumes above medium level. It's just a lot. There's a real intensity to volumes peak right there. And carrying it through the upper treble, not nearly as bad. So where RS5, I would raise the volume a bit to hear all of the treble. I think Softears at medium treble, at medium volume, kind of gives you all the treble that you need. And I think that kind of works out pretty well there. But yeah, not quite what I was actually expecting, or my expectations were probably more in line with what RS5 does, and kind of this easy, natural gain, and maybe they would have added a little fun element to it, a little more bass. So I think I got that part right. This part, really not expecting what happened there, and just for my ears, it's just it's quite intense, and yeah, not really expecting that. So sound with impedance adapter. So impedance adapter. So this is my RADS1 ES100 with a 75 ohm, and I think it's pretty much any impedance adapter. You get a gigantic amount of bass, and this gigantic amount of bass actually balances out this gigantic amount of lower treble right here. So if you actually have an impedance adapter, what you end up with is, I would call it an upscale BL03. Extremely likable for those who like that very thick mid. Those of you who like blondes and you kind of recognize those very thick, some people will call them bloated, but they're just super thick. And it takes all the edge off of the 3K with an overabundance of balancing bass energy is how I would say it. For me, it's kind of shockingly good in that mode, because I'm a blonde fan and I love the BL03, and yeah, it kind of outdoes the BL03 at what it does pretty well. You're going to pay 10 times the amount of money for it, but it does it quite well. So shockingly good. It's kind of my guilty pleasure mode. It's one of those things where you're never going to critically review it all that well because it's bloated and too thick. But, as far as listening to it in my spare time, yeah, I have no problem with it. It's kind of a great, in that very thick, very bassy mode. It's kind of nice. So next. So it's called volume, right? So ironically, the volume, like I talked about, it's really hard for me to wrap my head around a medium volume set the way this one is. And if you're used to raising the volume to bring the vocals forward, to enjoy detail and texture in vocals is very hard to do here, because you're probably going to get hit with something in that 3K area before you get the volume up enough to enjoy the mids. So yeah, it's kind of ironic that they picked that name, and it was sort of one of my issues with the set itself. But moving on. So the bass, like I said, the bass is actually kind of a fun level. It's a little elevated over RS5. Not too bad, not too much bass, definitely not lacking bass, but it's done very, very well. And I call it this sub in the room kind of concept, where it doesn't attract attention to itself. It delivers, and it's powerful and impactful, textures and definitions, and it's very likable decay. You can sit there and listen to notes and follow them as they decay out. Really, really nice, but it sort of has this, there is no attention drawn to it. It doesn't do anything wrong. You just sort of hear it, and it delivers, and it goes away. Yeah, it's done very, very well, and very much like the bass on this guy. So I will say it's hardly noticeable in the best possible way, kind of like a Softears should be. It is totally integrated with the balanced armatures, and yeah, quite good. Very happy with that part of it. So the mids is sort of where it goes mixed feelings, and you just can't ignore that 3K like I talked about. You can say it sounds a little different than a grasp, but it really doesn't. And as soon as you hit a track with it, it just kind of pops out at you, and it becomes fatiguing. So I just don't think you can ignore it. You really have to consider it when you're considering volume. And there's just enough warmth and edginess. I mean, like I said, there's actually a little bit more energy coming into the mids, so they do have some warmth there. This gives you this edgy, sharp edge to it. So these two sort of work together to balance it out, and I think that does sort of work okay. But the clarity and the detail just feels a little forced. That gain just feels a little unnatural to me, and I think it feels forced. Lots of separation, which is kind of a good thing, but yeah, I don't know. Mixed feelings on the mids here. They just don't strike me, because it's one of my absolute favorite parts about RS5 is the mids are absolutely gorgeous, and this isn't quite there. So a track like Adele's Hello, and when you listen to that track over and over again on lots of different sets, you get very used to the very beginning of that track, her voice at the lower end, and then when she hits the higher notes, there's a range there that you should actually hear quite well when mids are done balanced as they are on RS5. So here, because of the 3K, the bottom end is sort of pulled in a little bit. It doesn't quite dig as deep as it should on her voice, but the upper end, where she's rising, and that sharp edginess, that intensity to her voice, I think comes across quite well on volume. I think her voice actually plays quite well to this sound signature, so that was kind of why I kind of called that one out. I think pretty good, just missing kind of that smoky low end, but the rest of it, that edginess, that intensity that she has to her voice, yeah, I think it carries quite good on Hello. Just don't turn the volume up too much. And you contrast that with Diana Krall's Body and Soul. She's got that lower, smoky, there's a real bottom to her voice, and that's kind of hard to come through on this tuning because it's sort of slanted towards those upper mids. So, that song is one of those songs where I like to turn it up and to hear that texture, her voice. And when it comes across just right, it gives you goosebumps because it sounds like she is literally right there in front of you when it's done, right, like RS5. So on here, I think the balance is just off a little bit, so she doesn't quite go down as much as she should. You can't raise the volume enough to hear the texture that you should. So yeah, it's kind of it doesn't really work out for me. So new track, Florence and the Machine, King. So her voice again, the beginning of that track, her voice has this darkish, somber tone to it. Not so great on this set. It kind of sounds okay. But then as the song goes on, in about 2 minutes where she raises her voice and the drums kick in and the 3K kind of kicks in, and this song sort of takes you through some of the best parts of volume, and then to these problem parts, because you can almost hear her voice is kind of down here in the beginning of the song, and as the drums kick in and they're hitting right around in this area, there's an intensity to those, and then her voice kind of rises along with it, and the two of those things end up hitting the same spot in your ear. It's kind of a bit too intense, and then it kind of comes down a little bit. So not too bad. It just kind of takes you through the journey of the mids on the volume for me the first time I heard it. And I think the track came out on Friday, and it just kind of took me through some of the good parts and the bad parts on volume for me anyway. So Johnny Cash is Hurt, another one where it came up a few days ago, and I've been listening to it on and off. It's always been in my playlist, but again, it's one of those tracks where you sort of need a certain amount of volume to hear his age and his voice, and that's like my most favorite part of that track is he sang it later in life, and you could almost hear his age as he sort of labors to breathe and to get the words out. Yeah, I actually love that song. I love hearing him sing that song, and there's just tiny details that I love hearing in his vocals that I need a certain amount of volume for, and it's just too hard to get on this set to that point without it, becoming too fatiguing. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I wish that song sounded better on this set. I think the mids in general, I kind of wished it was just not as intense as it really is. So enough harping on the mids. So the treble. So together with the bass, it does bring the fun. There is quite a bit of energy and detail and air, and I think they actually nailed the upper mids pretty well. Once you get over the hump, I do think the rest of this, especially when you're listening to it at medium volume, actually does work quite well. And some parts were actually quite enjoyable. But if you're an RS5 or a Cerberus fan, a fan of that kind of polite, refined treble, this is definitely up notch or two. So very much volume at lower is kind of like RSV, or RS5 at higher volume, like I talked about. The fun is an energetic, edgy presentation, great extension, detail, and sparkle and air. So I think they did nail that. But so when you get to a track like Above and Beyond's Live at Hollywood, Counting Down the Days, Liquid Love, it's this combo song, great female vocal, really super nice the way it begins, and her voice, the orchestra behind it, that's where you hear Softears' DNA. These tracks that don't have so much bass and don't hit the 3K, and they kind of live and breathe very nicely on volume, and that was just one of those tracks where you can kind of fall into it, and you forget about the 3K because it doesn't really hit it until I think the snares, there's something that hits it, but it's really not that bad. But her vocal, again, it's this sort of half edgy vocal. It's actually quite nice on a big stage, showcasing that great voice and supporting smooth strings in the back at the right level. Kind of sounds like RS5. Solid bass. Again, this airy, ethereal, orchestral rise to the right levels. Everything was sort of right there in the right place on that track. So it was sort of the frustrating part about volume for me, is that there's some tracks that work really, really well, and you swear, yeah, that's exactly what this thing should sound like. And then you hit a 3K put or just some instrument that became really fatiguing or really tense, and it sort of reminds you that something is just not quite the way I would have tuned it, is how I'll put it. So yeah, pretty much this whole album of vocalist and orchestra, I think all plays very well to volume, and probably a good, if that is sort of your main, this is an acoustic album, I think that does play well to volume. So like I said, the stage can be quite immersive. Too much treble will actually flatten it out a little bit. You're probably not going to be able to take too much treble and too many tracks anyway, so I tended to listen to tracks that didn't really feature a whole lot of lower treble like that, but it does flatten it out a little bit. But between average and above average imaging, separation, and layering, they're all pretty good. But for me, I tend to notice that stages get a little bigger with a little more volume, a little more treble, and the upper treble tends to give you a little more air and a little more space. And I think I was missing some of that by being limited on volume is kind of what it felt like to me. So I think it's probably better than how I am describing. It's just I'm used to something perhaps a little bigger at more volume, something different. I was just kind of missing or lacking there that other people will probably be fine with. So that's about it. That is a long take on volume. So thank you guys for hanging in there, and I will see you next time.